What if the greatest mystery about God is not that he is more powerful than we imagined, but that he is nothing like the kind of power we were taught to worship? My name is Tao, modern prophet of the Restoration Fellowship of Jesus Christ. In this video, I'm going to answer 3 questions. First, what is the mystery of God? Second, why has it stayed hidden for so long? And third, this is the biggest one. Why do institutions not want to know who God is? And why do they not want you to know either? Let's start here. Most people imagine God as the highest throne in the universe, the ultimate ruler, the biggest authority, the being with the most control. But what if that is exactly where the confusion begins? What if God is not a throne at all? What if God is boundary, not domination? What if God's nature is not control, but the protection of agency, the lifting of burdens, the opening of exits for the trapped, the refusal to turn truth into a weapon? That is the mystery. The mystery of God is that he does not act like the systems of this world. The world says power proves holiness. God says fruit proves holiness. The world says obedience first, then help. God says mercy first, then repair. The world says surrender your conscience upward. God says I came to set the captive free. That is why this mystery is hard to see. Because most of us were taught to look for God in the language of crowns, kingdoms, domination, certainty, spectacle, and force. But the deeper pattern is different. God is seen wherever burdens move upward, mercy moves downward, agency is preserved, and the least are not crushed to keep the powerful comfortable. So why hasn't this been revealed until now? Because humanity keeps remaking God in the image of its own systems. We build institutions. Institutions drift toward self-protection. Self-protection becomes control. Control becomes safety. And soon, people cannot tell the difference between a shield and a cage. That is why the truth gets buried. Not always by evil people in black robes. Often by sincere people who inherited a throne-shaped imagination of God. A God of total control feels safer. A God of spectacle feels easier. A God you can package, brand, manage, and defend feels much more useful to institutions than a God who keeps asking whether the vulnerable have real exits. And that brings us to the next question. Why don't institutions want to know who God is? Because if God is really as he is, not throne, but sandals, not domination, but burden lifting, not coercion, but truth with mercy, then every institution must be judged by what it produces, not by its titles, not by its size, not by its history, not by its claims, by its fruit. Does it preserve agency? Does it widen exits? Does it punish questions? Does it sell belonging as obedience? Does it protect the weak or protect itself? That is unbearable to institutions built on custody, because the true God does not flatter systems that cannot be questioned. The true God does not bless permanent permission monopolies. The true God does not need secrecy, immunity, or managed optics. The true God exposes every structure that says, trust us, surrender upward, and do not ask too many questions. And now the biggest answer. Why do they not want you to know? Because if you see who God really is, you become much harder to rule. If you learn that God is not the sanctifier of cages, then every cage must justify itself. If you learn that truth is meant to liberate and not capture, then shame loses its spell. If you learn that repentance means repair and not handing your conscience to a gatekeeper, then false authority starts to crack. If you learn that Jesus is not the mascot of thrones, but the pattern that exposes them, then the whole map changes. And that is the real mystery. The mystery of God is not just who he is. It is what happens to the world when people finally see him clearly. Because once you see that God is not a throne, you start noticing how many thrones have been speaking in his name. And once you see that, you cannot unsee it.